Hello and welcome to another episode of Pivotal Moments with Lolita. As always, I'm so excited to have these conversations, and I have a longtime friend and supporter joining the conversation today. I have Mr. Will joining us today. Now, I'm going to give you just a little brief bio about the Emmy-nominated producer, actor, corporate recruiter, TV show host. But Will, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, I mean, considering the topic and all those titles you just labeled, that's a lot of pivoting. So we'll talk about that. Um, but I mean, yeah. So I do a lot of things. So my name is Will Lash. For those who don't know me, I'm also known as Onix. If you follow that trajectory throughout my life, I did some reality TV a while back. But yeah, it's interesting when you say all that stuff because I my normal everyday thing is uh, I have a wife, I have a child, and I go to work every day. So
Yeah,
and then on
yeah,
the side, I
right.
do that acting stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's great to be here. It's great to see you. We go back a while, and
Yeah.
glad to be here. All like you said, always willing to support.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that very much. So, yes, let's get into the conversation. So, obviously, the theme of this show is pivotal moments. And it's always funny because people always are like, wait, pivotal moments? Like, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands. So, which one do I talk about? So, which pivotal
Right.
moment will you be sharing with us today?
Let's see. I mean, the first thing when you talk about pivotal moment for me was the birth of my child. Like that was the first thing, the big thing that I thought about. And then it was, all the times, being here in the DC area, working for government contractors, I've been laid off a few times. Even in just the nature of the work that I do as a recruiter working in the government defense sector, I'm always kind of changing directions and supporting different customers. I thought about that. I thought about, going from being a full-time employee to being a contractor. And those you don't really think about how those changes affect. You're still doing the same work, but the everything around you kind of changes, and the moves that you make have to change. In regards to paying taxes, those types of things. Those
Yeah, yeah.
you're not accustomed to doing. The big tax bills. And then I also thought about the things that I do in the entertainment industry, and the success of our show, and having to sort of change directions with that, and then thinking if something big happens over here, what do I change over here? I have a job, I have a career that that I may have to alter and do some different things to accommodate that different plan in life. And so yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I said, there's so many things to think about, and I think really what I just want to talk about is just kind of being ready and being prepared for those pivots, and not being scared of them, because I think that's what a lot of people keeps a lot of people from pivoting. Like it's almost like we think of it as a negative thing, and it's not always negative. You have to put together a plan. You have to be ready to execute, and then and think more about the successes that are on the other end, than the failures.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And, one of the reasons why I started this show when we were first kind of entering into just the whole pandemic and it was really scary. I mean, it's still scary, but I think initially, especially, this was something that most people of our generation had not experienced. And I found that so many people were just almost becoming paralyzed with fear. And I wanted to show that, what, we've been pivoting all our lives. We may not have recognized it as dealing with a pandemic, but we've been making these adjustments and these changes. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we've been doing that, what we learned, and how we can continue doing that. I
Right.
really appreciate you
Yeah.
pointing out those variety of pivots that you've
Yeah.
had to
Yeah. I mean,
make.
I think our, like you said, our life is just a series of pivots. And it's how well you're prepared, and and how you deal with what's on the other side. One thing that brings to mind, this isn't my personal story, I mean, it's a personal story, but I think of my aunt who, out of all the brothers and sisters, all my dad's brothers and sisters, she was the one who ended up having to take care of my grandmother before she passed away. And how that changed her life completely. And thinking about how she had to alter her family and her lifestyle to accommodate the full-time care of a senior mother. And and those are things that we don't necessarily think about today at our age. I mean, maybe it depends on how old your parents are, but it's something to be prepared for in the long term. I've got 4 brothers and sisters. I've got more than that, actually, but in my immediate household, I've got my 2 brothers and my 2 sisters, and at some point we're gonna have to look at each other, sit down, and say, okay, who's gonna do this?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. So, as we talk about these different pivots that you've had to make and that you've observed, what would you say was a lesson that maybe a constant lesson that you found that was kind of like your why? You go to different workshops and events and they always say, find your why. What would you say was that central theme that's unchangeable that you maybe discovered through some of these pivots?
Yeah. Looking back, I didn't really think a lot about it at the time, being young, being in I guess really started in high school. And I always did a lot of different things, right? And it wasn't until I think I graduated from college. I was about to graduate from college, and my coach, so I was a collegiate athlete, and I remember my coach saying that I would have been, I was great. I was a good athlete. I can toot my horn a little bit. I was an All-American. Division I All-American. But at the same time, my coach said one time that I would have been a much better athlete, a much greater athlete, if I didn't do so many things, and I only focused on track and field, which is what I did.
Wow.
And in some ways it kind of stung a little bit, and I was like, okay, I get where you're coming from, but my whole perspective was to have as many options as possible. And that's the lesson I think I've learned throughout my life, because being over 40, and especially as a Black man, and I see you look at the life expectancy of a Black man, when you don't really understand what midlife means until you hit 40, and you think, yeah, like most of the Black men I knew that even lived a full life. 80, 81, 82 is about it. So you're midlife, right? So
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Like, you're not going to necessarily be a recruiter for your whole life. At some point you're going to retire, or at some point you're going to your job may be obsolete, and then you got to find a whole different career. And so I've always kind of kept my options open, made sure that I gained transferable skills that that don't just apply to the job I have today, but could apply to jobs later. I mean, career changes are one of those pivots that are really scary for people, and because you're going into a different world, different area that you don't know, you're not familiar with, and you may not even know anyone that may be on that other side that can help you. But one key is to be able to allow to network in that space, because it's all about who you know, and it's not necessarily what you know. A lot of times it's who you know.
Yeah.
And giving and having allowing someone to see those transferable skills that you have, and give you an opportunity. That's really all it is. That makes anyone successful is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes you have to make your own, and then sometimes it's just, you're at the right place at the right time. But but like you said, the key for me was just being able to, I guess in some ways, kind of like Madonna or any of the other six, you have to reinvent yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
Not be afraid to try something new. And it's not easy and it's scary, but you have to be willing to take that step.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, I think a lot of people recognize, especially again, going back to the pandemic and everything that's come with that. Look how many of us have had to reinvent ourselves, right? I mean, we're talking everyone from, the entrepreneur to major department stores and major big businesses, having to all of a sudden go from, their stores packed to now curbside to now online, and it really, I appreciate what you're saying, because if you're someone who does not know how to do that, and you feel that you have to stay on one track, one point, that would be very challenging. It would be very, very difficult. So I really get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it is interesting that I say that, because one of my biggest fears was, like, when I was at the Emmys, and as much as I wanted to win that Emmy, that fear was, what if I win? Now what? Right? What are you gonna do?
Wow.
I mean, not saying that you have to win an Emmy to put all, jump in both feet and kind of and navigate those waters, but I mean, I'm still an actor. I still are pursuing acting, but it was like all that pressure of, what if I won? And so it was like, do I have to, I have to get an agent? I have to get a manager. Do I move to LA? Do I, like, what?
Yeah.
But on top of that, I have a family to support, right? So I can't just quit my job that, pays well enough to, afford a lifestyle to live in this area, right?
Yeah.
And
that's another show, right?
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I've got an 8-year-old daughter. Like, what do I do? Is that a big enough sacrifice, or how much do I sacrifice? So
Yeah.
it was scary. Unfortunately, I didn't win. Like they say, it's just a pleasure to be nominated.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really wanted to win. But yeah, I mean, it's, so I've, I mean, fear is real, and it's, so as much as I can talk about how fearless you have to be, you can't discredit the fact that it's there and you're going to feel it.
Yeah, and that really kind of segues into the next point of adjustment. So I always like to bring that in, because with adjustments, a lot of times it's really adapting to something that's uncomfortable, unfamiliar. It's not necessarily the glitz and glam of, pivoting and your why. So can you talk about a time when you had to make an adjustment rather than a pivot?
I would say that comes to me. It comes quite often in my line of work. So being a recruiter and being a part of a team. And now I'm more middle management, but at the time as a team member, you have to be so flexible, because at any given time, my manager or my director could come to me, which they have several times, and say, okay, well, you're not going to work on this anymore. You got to now go work on this over here. And as happy as you may be in that spot, as you may be the customer, the people that you're supporting, the team around you, you might think you're in the greatest spot and everything is hunky-dory, but then, they're telling you now you got to go work on something that you weren't necessarily excited to work on.
Yeah.
And, and I've had to do that. But on the flip side, on the positive side of that, is the reason why I'm in the position I am today is because I've had the opportunity to experience all those different areas of my organization and do different things that have allowed me to be more well-rounded, It's allowed my acumen to, to be a lot, above other people on the team who either were a little bit more reluctant, or maybe my management didn't trust to be able to make that pivot, to make that adjustment as quickly as I could. And so, I benefited from that. It shows, number one, that you're a team player, that you can adapt to change, and hit the ground running. Even though like you said, even though we're talking about adjustments, there is an adjustment period. But once you've proven that you're able to adjust quickly, then it'll afford you more opportunities in the future, especially within your, within your place of employment, as long as they see it. It doesn't go unnoticed. I mean, it can, but
right.
Hopefully it doesn't.
Yeah. And it really sounds like too, it's about your personal reflection on it. It's true. Maybe that did show, your manager, just how flexible you were, but the things that you mentioned were really more personal lessons, and more personal things that you got from making those adjustments. Yeah. So as we come to the end of our conversation, what do you want to leave directly with the viewers, directly from you?
Just to kind of, wrap it up from what we've been talking about is in some ways it's just overcoming your fears. I think that's the takeaway. And sometimes these pivots are things that personal things that you may want to accomplish. And then some of them are forced upon you, and you have to be willing to, and able to adapt. It's scary, especially at this time, before we really got started. Like I said, just, blessed to be healthy and to be employed at this time, because there's so many, horror stories out there. And, I wouldn't even, I live in that, that fear is every day. I think I told you that I've been laid off a few times. So, coming to the DC area, working for these government contractors, a lot of them were small companies that I worked for when I first got here. And, all it takes is the loss of one big contract and a company can tank, right? And so, the first thing they do is they start laying off people to save on revenue, especially if you're indirect labor and or overhead labor or whatever, But I kind of have this PTSD around the holidays, because that's when I always, I've been laid off twice in December. And, it doesn't matter how well of a job I'm doing, or, how well I think I'm doing, or how well my leadership is telling me I'm doing. Once we get to that time of year, I always get this uneasy feeling like, anything can happen right now. And then it could, you're never really safe.
Right.
When you're working for somebody else.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But just a lot of times it's knowing yourself, knowing what you do best, knowing what you're good at, focusing on that, keeping your head down, and trying to stay as positive as possible. There's always going to be fear, but your positive outlook can outweigh that, and and when you get to the other side, you'll be a little better off. But, that's all. It's just stay positive. That's all we can do.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid, and don't be afraid to take chances that are going to allow you to be successful. Because we all know those people who have regrets, for not doing this or not doing that. And I know, life sets in, adulting sucks, parenting has its challenges. And you always, especially when you have a family, you have other people you have to worry about. But having open dialogue and communication with people in your life, people who your pivots may affect. You never know. You might have a certain level of fear because of the level of expectation that's on you, whether it's your provider of your family or whatever it may be. But the more you talk and talk about what your goals are and what your fears are, you never know. Those other people around you can either, A, be willing to hold you down, or two, being, understanding of the pressures that you're feeling, but they'll be willing to support you. And you never know, you might, your husband or your wife just may say, hey, go ahead, take that chance, I got you, like we can make it through, we'll do this together, or whatever it may be. So
yeah, I love it. And what I really appreciate is how real you kept it, because like you said, the reality is we're all going to face fears. We're going to have uncertainties, like you mentioned, about being laid off, especially in the DMV area. That's, there's a lot of government work and government contracts and all that, the times that we're living in. So those fears are very real. And I really appreciate that, you're not saying, hey, don't be afraid, life is great. No, you're going to have these fears, but here are some positive things that you can do. You can force yourself to stay positive, or get positive and then stay there, and also communicate with those that your decisions impact, because a lot of times you can come up with some really good solutions by just communicating. So I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Yes.
This is great. I'm glad you're doing this. You've always had this way of, like we've just talked about, of being able to sort of reinvent. Not that you're reinventing yourself, like you're always your authentic self, and you have a trajectory, and you know what it is that you want to give to the world. But there's always so many ways and methods of delivering the message, and you've been on it, and you've been able to adapt with the mode, the media, from going from public access,
right.
I mean, you've done it all. So
Thank you.
I'm proud to know you.
Thank you so much. And I am so appreciative of the support. You have always been there when I've called and had an idea and supported it from the Big Sis and Company days. So I truly appreciate you and definitely wish you and your family continued success and blessings with everything, especially going on.
Thank you. You too.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've watched another episode of Pivotal Moments with Lolita. I'm sure you've been just as inspired as I have been sitting here and listening and enjoying this conversation. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Pivotal Moments with Lolita. We will see you next time.